Welcome back to the Comic Book Historians Podcast. I'm Alex Scrand with my co-host and immigrant from the year 2525, Bill Field. Bill, how are you?
Hey guys, great to be back. Alex, great to be co-hosting with you once again. We haven't done this in a little while. It's fun. We have the esteemed honor today to be talking to the one and only dude himself, Steve Rude. Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Of course.
You guys are have a weekend next week, the Dude Weekend in San Antonio, Texas. Bill, tell us about that for about a minute or so before we start off our interview.
So I'm so excited. Our friend of all three of us, mutual friend, is Steve Ringenberg. And Steve and Steve are good friends. And Steve set it up for me to talk to Steve. And we together have kind of put together this weekend, next weekend, on the 4th and the 5th, Star Wars Day, and then Cinco de Mayo. And it's going to be amazing. Steve is going to paint both days. And he, on day one, he's got a female model who will be dressed as Supergirl. On day two, we've got a dude who will be, not the dude, he'll be painting, of course. We have a guy, some dude will be dressed up as Spider-Man. And so that'll be a 2-day thing. Steve will be signing autographs. He'll be doing all sorts of great things. But mainly, he's going to be connecting with his fans here in San Antonio. When he gets to town on Friday, we're all going to go out to eat at night. And he's going to meet a lot of the people, artists and whatnot here in San Antonio that are big dude fans. So it's going to be fantastic. I'm a little nervous because it's my first big thing that we've done here at the store since I took it over for Phil.
You just relax because I got this.
Okay, great. Well, then now I can relax, Alex.
That's true. Yeah. Steve Rude has a lot of experience. Yeah.
The hard part is the organizational part. And that's always a, I think the secret of life is to learn how to relax. And very few people ever get to that point where they spend their life nervous, worried, but I consciously went through this period where I learned to relax, and I don't even know how it came about necessarily. What it did, it's made a big difference. So when I walk into a place, I'm not nervous, I'm excited, and the purpose of all these things is to meet people. That's what life is about, and the fact that I'm getting to meet you guys in a different state that I live in and am even from, and get a chance to interact with everyone who's going to be there is a bonus for me.
But you were born December 31st, 1956 in Wisconsin. You're a Midwestern guy. A couple things to start off. What did your parents do, and when did you start reading comics?
Well, those are good questions. Normally I just get, when were you born, and they move on, My dad my parents are very normal. So how they ever, had me is a bit of a mystery. We're still trying to figure that out. I'm a weird, eccentric guy. I make up weird things in my head, and I love Dr. Seuss, and I never called my mom and dad. I made up names for them. And that was from the very beginning. So I don't know if that's some kind of HDDD or whatever it's called these days. But back then we didn't have those categories, thank God. Otherwise we'd all be in Ritalin, and it would have ruined our lives. My mom was kind of my role model. She's the one that very subtly taught me the things that I am now. Kind of this underlying foundation of, I don't want to say morality, but it kind of relates to that. How you treat people, that kind of stuff. My dad was very ordinary. He was so ordinary, I barely even knew what he did until I asked him, like when I was in high school. He worked at a very normal job. He would get up every morning. He never wore tennis shoes until later on. This is the generation we're talking here. Dress shoes, dress pants, everything. He finally relaxed way later on, but he was a product of those times. And he worked at a trucking transfer company, which to this day I barely even understand what that even means.
What age when you started reading comic books?
I had a friend who was well off, and he bought all these comic books. This was the year 1966. And I took it upon myself when I would go over to his house. He's another guy that I made up a name for. He had all the Marvel comics, none of this DC stuff. It was all this serious, cool Marvel stuff. And that's when it all started. but I never bought them. I would go over and read them at his house. And it wasn't until way later on in high school, you talk about being lonely, right? Well, freshman in high school, just starting out. And I had no friends because we moved twice. So there I was in the Upper Peninsula, the UP in Michigan and Escanaba. No friends. I didn't know anybody. All I had for a friend was my dog.
So you were 10 years old in 1966, a lot of Marvel being exposed to. From what I understand, you're big Jack Kirby, Gene Colan. Are those the images that caught your eye then?
Well, Kirby was hard to ignore. Normally, I recite the moment that I saw my very first Jack Kirby comic. It was Tales of Suspense, where the issue where Captain America was on the cover falling from the sky. I just thought, well, here's this bold, strong musculature with these slashing black lines, and you respond to these things emotionally, and that's really the core of what I have inside of me is this explosive emotions, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, as you can well imagine. As an artist, it's been nothing but a good thing. That's how it started. Anyway, in Escanaba, I was driving around with my dad. And I thought, I got to do something here. I need something to look at and read. So I actually wondered in my head, are comic books still around? This was 1972. I actually thought, is that Jack Kirby guy still around? Because, a couple of years when you're a kid is a lifetime, isn't it? Yeah, I walked into this drugstore in Escanaba, and there they were, all lined up, all these comics. And that's how the glue started to stick to me. I actually saw Demon #3, Kirby's Demon. I kind of missed the New Gods period, but when I found out there was this magazine called The Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom, I got all those old issues, and it was just a thrill. But by then, I was on the fast track there. There was nothing cooler than comics. And I drew and I drew. I get the comics and I get out my little ebony pencil they give you in high school and the typing paper. And I would just draw. I love to copy these things. That was fun.
And how do you feel, when you're looking at Demon and when you're looking at the Fourth World stuff, how did that to you as a fan at the time stack up against the 60s stuff that Kirby was doing? Did you like it as much?
It was Kirby's pencils got a little looser. Mike Royer was inking the work. Mike had the most brush control I've ever seen, because I got a chance to work with him later on.
Was that on Captain America?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. All of that stuff that I've done is a life fulfillment kind of a thing, as you can well imagine. I mean, if you think of yourself as someone who loved comics, loved the science of storytelling, because in comics, anything is possible. You end up devoting your entire life to the science, and it's second to none. I remember my dad came to one of the conventions one time, and he had no idea what to make of it, being Mr. Normal. This was the Chicago convention when 1 million people showed up at shows, and that was an alien environment to him.
Who was better on Spider-Man to you, Romita or Ditko?
Well, I grew up I actually kind of missed out on the Ditko days. So when I saw the Romita stuff, that was, much more classically cleaner drawn, and not as idiosyncratic, I really took the Romita all the way.
You were would you say you were kind of sensitive in a way as a kid because it seems like you took everything in and you noticed things more than probably your average kid.
Yeah.
Would you say that you were drawn to superhero stories because of your affinity for myths and justice and morality? You think that had something to do with it?
Well, I can tell you by the time I came out of the Marvel phase into the 70s, it very much informed how I think about things. I when I hear about the incidents of, I'll give an example. Somebody's being mugged in a New York subway and nobody's helping. Well, that's where I step in. Knowing that I could get knifed or killed, if I didn't step in, I would be ashamed of myself. And besides, I don't conduct my life like everyone else does. Everyone else is kind of a lemming.
Do you think that still carries over to this day when you do superhero work?
Absolutely. There's not a doubt.
When did you officially just start drawing and then when did you decide you wanted to be a cartoonist? Like what age range was all that happening?
Well, it's interesting that you use the word cartoonist. I've never thought, to me, a cartoonist is a Charlie Brown kind of an artist.
Yeah, that's true. That is a different thing.
I wanted to be a comic book artist who had illustration level skills. Again, my early days when I would see the Andrew Loomis books in the library. So all this stuff was kind of coalescing at the same time. There's no way I was just going to contain myself with black and white line work in comics. So I had to go way beyond that. So that's why you saw the painted covers and the various things in Nexus, because I needed to expand those skills. That's what I wanted to be. Because an illustrator can do anything, and I wanted to be someone who could do anything. That's power to me. That's the kind of power I wanted as an artist.
So you talk about illustration, which I love. The classic illustrators, Howard Pyle and all those guys. Were you looking at that stuff too?
I looked at everything as you would imagine, as any kid would, and you come away, through your personal filter, you come away with liking certain people more than others. And to me, was kind of the beginning was the Andrew Loomis books.
The 1970s Masters of Kung Fu with Paul Gulacy and the whole Bruce Lee period. Tell us about, was that an influence on you? And tell us about that.
It's hard to underestimate how big of a thing those very two things had on my life. The first Bruce Lee movie came out in 1972 in the States, and they called it Fist of Fury. And when I saw the ads for this thing on TV, I just went volcanic. It was unbelievable. The ads alone, the master of karate, kung fu, Bruce Lee, all this kind of stuff. And the Master of Kung Fu book was going on previously to that because of the Kung Fu thing, the TV show. When these things came together, like they tend to do in life, it kind of sets your stage for your entire life because it was so incredibly cool, those two things.
Yeah, I love that stuff. The Bruce Lee movies, my dad had me watch them, and that was happening at the same time I was reading comic books, and there was something about the two things together that really appealed, and I never really understood why, but I guess Bruce Lee himself was kind of a superhero anyway.
Absolutely. Those things are synonymous. Bruce Lee was a hero. He beat up the bad guys and got the girl. And that's what happens in comic books. And the thing about comic books is even when there's incredible conflict and the world hates these guys like they do at various times. They hate Captain America. They hate Thor. These guys still find a way to endure because of their foundation of morality.
Now, was Steranko an influence on you? Did you like his stuff when that was coming out?
No, I actually found out way later on by reading Master of Kung Fu what Gulacy's influences were. I got to know Jim, and of course Paul. Paul was my best man at the wedding, in fact. But Steranko, I just love the guy. There's an 8-pager that he turned out that I'm kind of big on referring to as like a turning point in comic book storytelling. The one that changed everything. It was called At the Stroke of Midnight.
The horror thing he did, yeah.
That was an eye opener, and everything I saw from then on. That was actually, the thing that Gulacy borrowed most of all is the storytelling thing from Steranko. But Gulacy was a genius at a very early age. When I got to know him, really well, like a best friend kind of a thing. I saw the work that he did when he was like between the ages of 18 and 21. You wouldn't believe this guy. I mean, he was so far beyond anyone. And I just completely idolized this guy. That's why I hitchhiked out to see him one year. And I had to meet the guy.
Is that why you had him draw the first two covers of Nexus at Capitol?
Sure.
Those are great covers, by the way. And it blew me away because I had forgotten that he did those until I found my copies of 1 and 2 the other day. And I was going through it and I go, I forgot these had Gulacy covers. And it was amazing to me. And you guys are you're very simpatico. Your styles are very complementary of each other, I think. So I think it's almost like I didn't realize it because it looks so much like your stuff at the same time in a weird way.
Well, I would say when you look at my work and you're trying to decipher where it all comes from, it's really Kirby and Gulacy.
He was really utilizing like that James Bond influence when he was doing that Masters of Kung Fu. Like some of those characters, Like one of them looked just like, Sean Connery and things like that. I mean, you could feel that James Bond vibe so well mixed with that Bruce Lee, like Kung Fu feel. Like he was able to merge like two genres when he was doing Master of the Kung Fu. It's really unlike any other person on that title.
Yeah,
The Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, were those something that appealed to you as a kid?
I didn't know about them until there was a show in the 80s called Night Flight, and it came on very late at night.
On USA Network. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, out of nowhere, I just happened to turn the TV on, and there's these Superman cartoons, and I thought, what in the hell is this? This is unbelievable. And to this day, I call him the Citizen Kane of animation.
Very much so. That was the most realistic cartoon at that time, and it remained the most realistic cartoon for like 2 or 3 decades. It seemed like.
Yeah, yeah.
When did you get into the painting aspect of your career?
And Frazetta, was he a part of any of that?
Frazetta, these all these influences came along around different times in my life. The Frazetta thing came around in 1976 or 77 when his first Valentine book came out. And I happened to be in art school in 78. And when we saw these books, that's when the whole thing, that's when the world became aware of this guy. I didn't know anything about him until then. But the book came out, and that's all us kids in our school talked about was Frazetta. We all wanted to be like him. And I'm still trying to be like him. A person's art is just like their signature. You can spot a Rockwell from a mile away. You can spot, I can spot an Alex Ross from a mile away. There's no disguising that. And I'm sure the same can be said of me. Is that a rude?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can spot a root from a mile away.
One time I was giving this talk in, it was Chile, South America. And I had this audience of college kids, and I held up this piece of paper that had all the signatures of the Disney artists. And I said, you notice something about this page right here? Every single signature is unique. There's only one signature that comes out of these guys, and that tells you something about the individual. Everyone's an individual, but when it comes to the arts, there's a lot of things that bond us, and that's the exciting thing about coming to stores like yours, and getting the chance to get out of the studio and interact with people.
Because I mean, you're spending a lot of time kind of engineering from your imagination, so to talk to people is like probably it's like a nice cherry on the cake of all the work you're putting into it.
It's a necessary cherry, actually, Alan. Even though I happen to be a loner and like being alone, Kirby liked being alone. He needed his alone time to dream up things and just let the things come out of him, some of them as he at will. So I'm perfectly suited for that. But every now and then you got to come out of your cave and meet the real world.
I read in an interview you did that you went to Marvel, you ran into Jim Shooter. He was editor-in-chief at the time, and he gave you some feedback. When was that? What year was that?
I think it was 1980. That was a time when, I had a lot of drive, and I just kind of worked by instinct. And my instinct said, well, you've got to go up there and get feedback. So you spend an entire year at a job, a low-paying job, and you save up, and then you get on a bus or a train like I happen to do, and you go up there. That's when I met Shooter, and he brought out this Captain America comic, and apparently this is something he does for everyone that comes up there. He pointed out all the things that worked with it, because he had very specific ideas on how storytelling works and how it doesn't work. So I still have that comic, and he was very helpful. Bit of an odd guy, but much odder than I thought at the time. But he was very helpful. And then I just kind of walked around the bullpen. I wasn't going to just go in there for 5 minutes and leave. So I wandered around like I tend to do and try to go into all the offices and meet these people. And that was the second part of the fun stuff, is meeting these people. I met Archie Goodwin. I met some of the artists in the little room where they called kind of the half of the bullpen or something. And that's what I came to see. And it was just exciting as hell.
Was Jim Shooter taller than you are? Because you're a tall guy.
I'm 6'5.5". He's like 6'7" or 8", something like that. Yeah.
Were you pretty surprised by that? Like looking up to talk to a person for the first time, or?
It's unusual. There's nothing average about me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. tell us about meeting Mike Baron, and you guys started Nexus together with Capital Comics, and that was located in Madison, Wisconsin, where I think you guys were living. Is that right?
That's right. And this is a case of just basic common sense canvassing the places that were in Madison and making contacts. Anyone with ambition is not going to sit there in his room all day drawing. He's got to get out there and hustle. But it's kind of a blind thing where you don't know what you're doing. You just kind of work on instinct, and you think, well, there's a newspaper down the street. What if I brought up my work to them? Maybe they could use me for something. And normally it didn't work out, but you never let that stop you, because from one of those newspaper visits, I got recommended to this guy who works at an insurance company. He likes to do comics, but he can't draw. His name is Mike Baron. So we quickly hooked up in a day when people's word actually meant something. We met in this beautiful sunny day in August, and Baron's a guy of few words. He's nothing like I am. He's very terse and to the point, and still is like that. He's a very interesting guy. But we got together, and I think we were grounded both by a lot of ambition.
So 81 was an important year for you guys, wasn't it? Because that was the first year, or that was the year that the first Nexus came out. Yeah.
Yeah. Baron was the real hustler back then. And there was a place in town called Capital City Distribution. They distributed comic books. And Baron would meet up with them and basically hassle them all the time. You should look at what we're doing. There's this new wave thing going on with comics where there's a potential that people not in New York could actually dare to publish a comic book and maybe get away with it. And that's what happened. Baron led the way. I just stayed in my room in the Y, meet girls and draw my pictures from my comic books and attempt to use an airbrush, which never really worked out. It was a good time. Living on campus like that was very exciting. I was right in the middle of everything. Baron was, several miles away in a different town, and he would come and pick me up. So because I had no car. You don't have a car when you're living on campus. So you either take a bus, you have somebody come up and pick you up. And that's what he did a lot of the times. And we go over to his place and we just start talking. And I get out the paper and he would tell me these ideas that he had, and I would try to draw them out a little bit. And Baron would stand over my shoulder and tell me, yeah, that's what I want, or try to modify this a little bit. But he was very specific about the Nexus thing. The only thing at that time that was kind of unusual is that we didn't have a name for the character. We were kind of calling him generic stuff like the Executioner and things like that. And then one day, about a year after that, after we had actually made a lot of progress with this character, he just calls me up literally out of nowhere and just no preamble, just said Nexus. I said, that's it.
That's great. Well, so after Nexus, like in the mid 80s, you started doing Nexus was still going on. It wasn't after Nexus, but you started getting into other areas, and you did what to me is still my favorite thing you ever did, and that's the Kamiko Space Ghost comic. And what you did, and a lot of people don't know this, and so I want to bring this up, is there was a 1 hour Space Ghost special in prime time in 1967, I believe. You captured the spirit of it so well and so much, and so I'm curious, did you ever meet Alex Toth? I know you were a big fan, but how did that lend itself to you doing such a wonderful representation of Space Ghost?
I was never really a fan of Alex Toth. I didn't even know who he was until I found out way later on. And this is something that's pretty unknown to fandom at the time, but I had no idea who created that character, Space Ghost. And then things started coming about where Xerox's various model sheets came out. But I was never really a big Alex Toth fan. I was a Kirby guy. And the only reason people cite Alex as being such an influence is because of Space Ghost. He drew Jack Kirby characters in layouts for the cartoon show. And it was incredibly dynamic. I ended up learning a lot from Alex over the years. Who wouldn't? Just as much as I've learned from Roy Crane, the ultimate simplistic master, which I think everybody in comics could take a look at and learn volumes from. Have you guys ever seen Roy Crane's work? I'm sure you have. I'm sure
Wash tubs is like my favorite thing.
Is that right?
I've read every single one of those.
He's so simplistic and he's all there. And that's the incredible part. The first time I met Alex was Alex Toth was in San Diego, 1984. And he was still relatively sane back then. He would walk around and meet people, and I met him. Of course, I had to walk up to him. I have pictures of that moment. And I said, "Would you come over, Alex? Would you come over and take a look at what I've got? I want to know what you think and give me some advice," because I was always asking for advice. And he looked at this page of gestures that I had done in my sketchbook, and he goes, "I'll never forget this." He goes, "If you don't have it here, you don't have it at all." You know what he means by that?
The basic foundation is the most important part of it. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, and honestly, from that moment forth, and even before then, I practiced the gesture, because that really is the foundation of everything that you do as far as solid figure drawing goes.
For Nexus, okay, was Space Ghost and of the 60s and 1960s Star Trek, were those influences on Nexus when you guys were making Nexus?
1966 was the focal point of what is it, a locust point or something like that, of where everything came together. Space Ghost came out 1966, Star Trek 1966, The Green Hornet with Bruce Lee 1966. Everything happened in 1966. The only thing that didn't happen then was 4 years earlier, which was Johnny Quest. And that was a show that I like to tell people, the whole family sat around the TV show watching that. That was a family show. It was remarkable to think back at the bonding that went on with a family under a very singular animated show. When I mentioned the word imprint, right? When I saw these things, Star Trek was a little beyond me. That came later on. But when these things hit, they buried themselves. They embedded in me so strongly that they literally are the foundations of my inspirations, besides the comic books that I read for the rest of my life, up until the very moment we're talking.
You met Jack Kirby in 1984 when you won the Russ Manning Award. And if that's right, or if I'm getting that right, tell us about meeting him and what kind of relationship you had with him.
Gladly. The first award I won, which was obviously a complete surprise, because there was 4 issues of Nexus already out by then, but I wasn't exactly a newcomer. But yeah, that was the Russ Manning Award, and I remember the absolute shock that just went through me like a huge, it's like sticking your finger in the light socket kind of a thing. And I just, if anyone ever remembers the look in my face, it was pure shock when they announced my name. And you hear the cheers going up and all that kind of stuff. It's just overwhelming. In fact, that's what you hear a lot of times when people get into acting. They get that applause thing, and that's what kind of cements them to the future of their life, their future occupation, their future job, their future vocation. They hear that there's always a moment that takes place in a person's life like that. For me, it was just pure shock. And I got up there and I just mumbled a few words because I was still in shock when I got up there. But 2 years later, the Jack Kirby Awards came out. And that's when I won the Kirby Award. And of course, Jack was up there and Roz. And I remember I did a couple things that other people didn't think to do. I bought a rose and I gave it to Roz when I got up there. But I remember I was wearing these ridiculous 80s shorts and this shirt when I got up. It looks silly now, but that's the way it was back then. I always wear shirts like this. People never ask me about it really, but I need to have mobility, especially when I'm drawing, and I overheat really fast. So that's why I wear shirts like this.
You also got Eisner Awards, and you met Will Eisner, from what I understand. Tell us about that experience, meeting Will Eisner, and what was your relationship with him?
These were the most incredible early moments of my life, because I realized by the time I turned 30, I'd actually accomplished everything I ever set out to do in life. I mean, imagine how that felt. You're somebody who grinds away alone in a room and has this obsessive pursuit of wanting to be something more than ordinary.
This is like Elvis's Aloha from Hawaii concert. That's what you had that feeling.
Well, up until the 1990s, every moment of my life was surreal.
Yeah.
And I remember there were some pictures that people took of me getting these awards over the years. And I showed them to my mom. And the only thing she said was, "You look so sincere." Because that's how she knew me, is this total sincerity, no airs of any kind. I didn't know how to put on airs. So I just knew how to react and feel. And that's really what I'm all about.
Going more into the relationship with Kirby and Eisner.
Eisner was not an influence on my life at all, but he was kind of making this comeback, this 1972 special Aloha comeback. So I got a chance to meet him. And the only thing I really remember was walking up to him in New York, one of the New York shows, and I said, "How do folds work?" These are things I was just starting to figure out in the most basic ways, and I didn't really understand anything. But I sure wanted to learn. So that's one of my things. I would walk up to anybody and say, "Help me understand these things that I don't know." And I remember what he said. It was very interesting. He's a very nice guy, very youthful, Will Eisner. The most remarkable time when I met Jack Kirby, and there were several times with him, being around him was like it was in a special womb. You felt so relaxed. You felt so taken care of. He was like the greatest uncle you could ever have in your life. And I kind of related to feeling like you go back to Mayberry and you have this wonderful small town feeling where everything is safe and everyone is nice. That was when you walked into his home, that's what you got. Kirby had no airs about him whatsoever. He was just pure reaction. And I felt so comfortable with him. And I don't even know if it was something that he was aware of, but I was aware of it. I react, I emote. He had this thing on the wall, this big piece of art that I'd never seen before, because that's all Kirby did was create and produce. And he had this thing on the wall where this panther was on this big ship, and the panther was walking around. I don't know why the panther was there, but he stuck his head through one of the portholes, and somebody looked up and thought it was a head mounted on a wall. I just started laughing and laughing and laughing, and Kirby looked at me like I was a little nutty. But that's one of the moments I remember. I just guffawed and laughed, and because that was it just tickled me. And Jack didn't know what to make of that. Another time I remember going over there when we had just found out that some of Jack Kirby's artwork got returned. So I went over there, and in one of the spare bedrooms were these huge flat files of all the artwork that he stashed there. And the new stuff that just came in, he brought it out. And this is so embarrassing, what he was selling this stuff for. But I just remember getting out my checkbook, and I was never greedy about those things. I just wanted the most special things that meant the most to me. So I bought those things. The prices were obscenely low, like literally under $100.
Wow.
And I was loaded at the time because I never spent my money on anything except for dates. But I still have those. And another thing I did was when I wanted him to sign stuff for me, besides signing the pages that I bought from him. Oh yeah, I brought 4 of my favorite Jack Kirby comics, not 100, just 4. I said, "Jack, would you mind signing these to me?" Because I didn't want 1,000 books signed. I just wanted the most special books that were so dear to me.
Do you remember what they were?
I sure do. One of them was New Gods #2, and the other issues were some of the Jimmy Olsen books with the Guardian in there, because I was crazy about the Golden Guardian. You guys know what I mean when I talk about the impact that some things can have in your life and how it's like a gut punch.
Oh yeah.
The impact these things had on my life. Because remember, I'm just people talk about I hate to talk like a fan when they talk to me. Well, they got to remember I'm the biggest fan of all, and they feel like they have to apologize for that, which is kind of silly. I never apologize for the way that I am. The way that I am is the way that I am.
You had that impact on me too. I met you at the same show that I met Jack Kirby at, and Will Eisner at Dallas Fantasy Fair, And it was interesting that I was just as happy to meet you as I was Kirby. You were the guy for me back then, and I was a huge Nexus fan, and still am to this day. But your stuff in First had just started coming out, and it was, to me, it was life changing. What you were doing was so meticulous. It was so the storytelling was fantastic from both. The standpoint of your art and how you worked with Mike, and I just wanted to tell you, and this is the fanboy in me now coming out, but that stuff really mattered to me, and as a young cartoonist and artist, it really changed me in a lot of ways. So I want to thank you for that.
Did you go on to be an artist after that?
Yeah. Actually, I've been more in animation, and I've done a lot of storyboards. I've directed quite a few Captain Crunch commercials in Spanish. But yeah, you were a huge influence on me. And I did a comic for a short period of time in the 90s called Jack Spit, and you were a huge influence. You were a huge influence on me during that period. So
isn't that nice?
And you still are. And yeah, and I can't thank you enough. I'm curious. I know you're bringing one of your new Nexuses here to the store next week, and I can't wait to see it. It seems like you never tire of those characters, and those characters are so amazing. Judah, the Hammer, all of those characters. To me, how did that come to be? How?
And part of that question is, how did you develop and evolve as a person and an artist as you developed and created those characters?
It's hard to pinpoint that, but just by virtue of being an individual with different ways of looking at people in the world, that's where all this stuff comes from. When I was a little kid, the kindergarten teacher used to read Dr. Seuss stories to us, and one of them was the pale green pants with nobody inside them. And while the other kids were just listening, me and this other friend of mine next to me were just laughing. We thought that was the funniest thing we'd ever seen. Is these funny looking green pants chasing this guy around. Those are the things really when you're trying to find out, what's really behind all this. That's kind of where it comes from. It's this very different way of feeling and looking at things. All the things you're talking about there, Bill, is where that is kind of the foundation of, if you go way back, that's where it kind of started.
Wow.
I didn't see things the same way other people saw them.
What about the characters in Nexus resonate with you and Mike? I mean,
the fact that me and Baron were like Gilbert and Sullivan, or like Hannah and Barbera opposites. That's one of those things you keep hearing about, don't you?
Yeah.
Opposites, so that's what we were. So you bring these two sensibilities together, and they, at the same time they're colliding, they're working seamlessly together. So who can explain those things?
You both own the rights to Nexus, and it looks like you both have, at some points more later, separated off and did each of your own works with it. What was the reason for that, and are you still friends with each other?
Well, we talk every week, me and Baron. They say if you have a good sense of gratitude, you're always going to be on the right foot in life. Well, I've always looked at Baron as like the guy who started it all off. I have just the highest regard for him. I feel like I owe everything to him in a lot of ways. He was the older of the two, and he took me under his wing, and all these years later, we have a lot of mutual respect. The departure came about from the way he was writing had changed a lot, and I no longer saw the little, like what Bill was talking about, the little things of humor and things like that. They were kind of missing. And eventually you got to the point where I realized I had to do my own thing. And so that was a very, very tough moment in my life. I never intended to be a writer, ever. I was happy just to have these great scripts given to me by Baron, who were virtually perfect back in the Capitol in the first days, and even Dark Horse, before the whole comic landscape changed and they canceled us. But subtle changes took place, and I can't account for why they happen. I've seen this happen a lot of times with different artists and writers. Do you remember how great Alien was? Directed by Ridley Scott.
Yeah, the first one. Yeah.
Okay, well, and then later on he did these Prometheus movies, and I went from this, this 1979 movie was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. This is an example of someone who hit every mark exactly in the target area. Somebody that I didn't know what the hell he was even doing. So the standards that if you think I'm upholding the standards of the current Nexus book, it's because I have this feverish way of realizing that you're only literally as good as your last book. And if you don't keep it up, you've either lost your way entirely, it's like some people have, or your mind has changed over the years. And I'm a very self-monitored kind of person. So the idea of that happening to me, like it's happened to others, is unforgivable. So my life depends on how good my work is.
Does he still rank as the #1 comic writer that you've ever worked with?
Yeah, he has. Because he was as idiosyncratic as I was. All the weird little bits of humor that came in Nexus. I was drawing his scripts, and that's where the bonding took place. The opposites coming together. And I remember he would come. Baron would come over when we were living in Madison and drop off the scripts, and he would draw them in little thumbnail form. And what I remember most is laughing.
Yeah,
they were so entertaining to me. I just would laugh and laugh and. Baron being the low-key guy that he is, never reacted to anything. But I would sit there and laugh and then he would leave, and then I had to figure out a way to draw the things.
It seems to me that his roughs for you with the script, they were actually pretty detailed, weren't they?
They were, yeah.
Quite a few that he isn't an artist, but it's all there. And then you would take that and run with it,
right.
basically.
It's almost like kind of a Harvey Kurtzman type of thing.
These are funny things to look back at and examine in the here and now. Some things just come together in life in a very, very strange way. And that happened to be one of them.
You mentioned about the landscape changing and cancel and the industry canceling Nexus or something. Politically, are you guys pretty similar to each other? And what do you mean by canceling, just so I understand?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Without getting into details, have you be stoned over the internet. Yeah, we're very much alike.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, I interviewed him once and he was saying some of the same stuff.
You worked with both Marv Wolfman and George Perez, or worked through them, I guess, on some Teen Titans stuff early on, and it was kind of an homage to a comic that was being published at the time, DN Agents, and that was, to me, that was one of the best issues of Teen Titans ever. I still have that issue. I look at it often, and I always wanted you to be on a major book like that of characters like Teen Titans. And what did that do for you? How did you enjoy doing that? Was it an epiphany in any way? Did it lead to anything else? I'm just curious.
Well, I remember when those offers came along, it wasn't that I was surprised by it, but I knew that whenever somebody handed something to me, I had to put everything that I had in me for whatever I was doing. If people want to know, like, some kind of a secret that I might have that others don't, it's maybe that. What I pour into that is everything that I have, all the things I've thought about, and all the influences, and I kind of look at it as, you don't let people down. Jack Kirby never let me down. How could I be anything other than that? Never let the fans down.
Also, you did a couple pages for Heroes for Hope for Marvel in 1986. You did a Punisher magazine 2 cover in 1989. It seemed like you were kind of dabbling in the mainstream.
It's funny. I think I can kind of just reduce it to a very simple thing. The Marvel of the 60s was not the Marvel of the 80s when I got into the business. Things had changed a lot. But in fact, every influence I ever had came strictly from Marvel Comics. But by the time I got into the business, something was very different about it. When Shooter took over, he was a very bizarre guy. I think it was kind of related to the honeymoon period. where he gets in and everyone's excited, and then eventually, and this is a very scary thing. Your true nature has to come out at some point. And the nature of Shooter was not a nice person. He was a very strange guy. And he said things later on about me, about that meeting you brought up when I met him in 1980 or whatever, that were so distorted. I wanted to kill him. So it's good thing he wasn't in the same room. When people recite events and they're so bizarre of what actually happened, it's a very well, what do you make of that? I can't be someone like that. Seeing things the way I see in life, you can't be somebody who distorts reality to the point where nobody can relate to you anymore. That's a no-no. You don't do that. So what you want to do in life is cultivate your inner self, so that when you finally do meet people and they have a lot of regard for you, you need to measure up. And a lot of people don't do that. I made it a point to overcome incredible flaws in myself. I remember the first interviews I did, I was so clumsy. And I look back at those things with total embarrassment. Well, I looked at that and said, I don't want to be that person. I need to be better than that. So my whole life has been a journey to self-improve.
So that's interesting. So that Marvel, you just really didn't want to work for Shooter, basically. From what I've read, you were also kind of disturbed about the way Marvel was treating Jack Kirby in the 80s. So was that all of that together was kind of coloring your impression, and you were kind of doing almost a silent boycott and not working for them? Is that kind of the deal?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, speaking of Shooter, I wrote him a letter one time and I said, look, Jack is going to be dead someday. Own up to all this and cut the crap.
When that Marvel 80s stuff was going on, you said you wrote a letter to Shooter to, cutting the crap and whatnot. Did he ever respond to that? And how did you look at Marvel and that kind of mainstream Marvel while all this was happening and not working for them on purpose?
Well, it was definitely a deliberate decision not to work for them. And that wasn't the first time that happened. Again, my sense of how I regard life and how you have to stand up for things. Shooter wrote me back and said, if I thought I was doing anything to harm Jack Kirby, I would quit. Well, now, knowing what I know about people can say whatever the hell they want, but it doesn't mean it dovetails with the reality. And that's a really scary thing about people. How can you say one thing and be another thing on the inside? It's very scary to me. You don't want to be somebody like that. You want to be whatever you are on the outside, you have to be on the inside. So you can see I'm getting into my personal philosophy about life here and character. Because I don't see many people doing that.
It sounds like there's a certain honesty and a creative individual honesty, and you stay true to that, and you felt that Marvel wasn't exhibiting that, and so you didn't have that inspiration to work with that. And that's what it sounds like.
Well, I according to my right from wrong, you give him his damn work back, and you don't put up a lot of lordly blockades to convolute the whole situation. That's a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
And they weren't doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've noticed this, Alan. People can get all these funny reasons why they're not doing or doing something. But if it doesn't come down to in this case, giving him his artwork back, it's all a bunch of hooey.
Because I saw like a news report from back then, but I saw it recently when he did get his art back, and he was saying, well, there's a partial vindication here. I put a lot of work into. You could tell it meant a lot to his spiritual essence. If that's how that was my reading of it.
Well, in a straight shirt sleeve kind of a world, it's easy. Here's your art back. But this is something people do that is very, very dishonest and pretty despicable, actually.
Yeah, corporate stuff.
Disguise things. They get their stupid lawyers involved, and they take something that should be simple. And remember, anyone can make those decisions about making it harder or easier for people in life. In this case, they make it 1,000 times harder than it should have been. And it's all a bunch of adult nonsense, the way they can just make up and spin these things to turn them into something that's simple into something that's hopelessly complex.
The image revolution, and I ask Image because you did a little bit of stuff with him at that time, I mean. But in the early 90s, the industry was like kind of booming, and the Image guys were making like all this crazy money, right? And from what I read an interview where you felt that that amount of money could almost be somewhat corruptive of an influence. Is that right? And am I understanding that right?
Well, think about people that win the lottery. You know, 5 people win the lottery. 2 are going to destroy themselves. Um, the other 2 are going to make really bad decisions with it. And I've never met anyone who has ever won that kind of money and done something productive with it, like a sound-minded person should. That's what I look at when I think about the Image thing. These guys were very young. And young tends to relate with inexperience. You can't have the maturity, even if you're making these millions of dollars, to really understand the big picture of what that means. So you go out and do, this is what people do. They get the money, they go out and buy their Vipers and their Aston Martins and things like that, and they splurge. And this is the pattern of people. And they get sucked into this idea that a lot of times they think they're more than what they really are. And this is a common pitfall that people fall into. That kind of stuff didn't bother me because I was older and maybe had just a better sense of the illusion of all this stuff. It was just illusion. The only thing that matters in life is how you treat people and the work that you do to entertain them. In my case, because I'm an entertainer.
Now, you did a page for Phantom, a couple pages, 1 or 2 pages for Phantom Force 2, 1994. That was kind of like that final Jack Kirby comic that was used with Thibodeau was kind of his inker at the time, and he did some stuff for that in that Jack Kirby style. You did some stuff for a lot of artists, different Image people came together on that as a way of honoring Jack Kirby, for his final days. How was working on that, and did that Image, the idea, the conception you had of Image at the time, in some way affect you working on that?
No, it was just a nice gesture where people called me up and said, "You want to be part of this?" And I remember inking the work, and that was a lot of fun. It was nothing more than that. But really, it came down to a very simple thing. Pay Jack the millions he never got that he should have, if people were a little more fair and honest in life.
So it was really just your love of Jack Kirby. That's all that was.
Entirely.
So in 1998 through the 2010s, you did work with the big 2, Legends of DC Universe, X-Men, Children of the Atom, Hulk versus Superman, Spider-Man, Thor Before Watchmen, Captain America, Aquaman. What brought on this change to work with these people that you kind of purposefully weren't working with them before? And how was that experience?
Well, I think right before that happened, there was a big bankruptcy thing going on with Marvel. And in my mind, I said, Marvel has to burn to the ground and turn into ashes before I'll work with them. Just out of purely moral reasons. And that happened. So by the time I started working on those that run of books, that was the right time to be doing this. So I looked at that as the chance to put my individual stamp in all these books. Everyone else was doing their own thing. When I did Captain America, it was Kirby Captain America.
Yeah.
When I did Spider-Man, it was a Romita Spider-Man. And the people I worked with ranged from people I thought were wonderful. One of them was Ralph Macchio.
Oh, yeah.
He was just great. And the best of all was Glenn Greenberg. He had the attitude that I just loved with creative people. It was no restrictions, just have a good time. I'm going to be your cheerleader, and I'm so excited to see what you're going to turn in. That's what you want. What you don't want is what I got from a lot of other editors who had their head up their rear ends. One of them was the Children of the Atom book. They scheduled me to be in books that they wanted to come out mere months before, just as I was starting the things. So think about that. Wouldn't you rather have the books in studio before you even think about how you're going to release them or when you're going to release them?
Right.
This was a concept that eluded these people, and these are the people I have conflict with.
When you were talking about those editors, the ones that kind of let your creativity go, and others that were kind of making, I guess, artificial boundaries on the work. While you're doing all that and you're kind of bringing some Kirby energy, did you find was it fun, or was it more of a struggle of working with them and then bringing classic Marvel while also introducing like your own style of material, all kind of in one thing?
Have you ever heard the phrase "life is who you work with"?
Yes.
Okay, well, I made it up. That's one of my original quotes right there. That should answer your question right there. Read between the lines.
So I really enjoyed your Captain America that you did with Mike.
Oh, Mike Royer, yeah.
Yeah. How was that to work with him? Because I know you've always really admired him. Was it everything you expected it to be?
Yeah, I think it was. Mike is a pretty undersung guy, and I think he has a sense of inferiority sometimes. And I wanted to do what I could to get him working for a company he normally isn't associated with, just as I wasn't. I wanted to bring him in and kind of like, here, Mike, you've got some good work here. I want you to eat this stuff, and that's kind of what it was. It was a gesture of getting him paid for something that maybe he was not getting at the time.
Hulk versus Superman. Did you enjoy working on that title?
I did, but I was working with an editor that I did not care for very much. And that was another case of putting up roadblocks where I thought it was stupid. What I remember, that was the time I came into conflict with copyright. I couldn't put anything in there that I thought was fun. I mean, even if this continued with DC forever, which I think is preposterous. And I think it has a lot to do with the lawyers calling the shots over the creative people. But people make up their own rules in life, right? And the rules at DC were you can't have anything in your book that's even remotely copyrighted. Well, to them, the entire world is copyrighted, down to a little Starbucks symbol. This is asinine. This is just plain stupid. So according to my rules, that stuff is harming nobody. It's entertaining everyone. But for some reason, certain mindsets come in and they take all the fun out of doing comics. And to this day, I fight with DC all the time about that kind of stuff. And that's one of the reasons I don't want to ever work for them, really.
Let's get to the Moth at Dark Horse. How was that experience? Gary Martin, the series. What was your narrative mission on that one?
The Moth came about because of actually it was during the Image period, and they were doing these trading card things, and some of the Image people came over to me and said, "Can you invent some characters that we're doing for a creator original set of trading cards?" That's literally where it came from. So I came up with two characters, the Moth and the Silencer. And that's where those came about. And then from there, certain things took place where I was forced to develop the character. And one of the things that was most on my mind was, why would a guy wear a costume? Well, if he's in the circus, that's what they do. They wear costumes. So that's where the circus angle came in. I wanted a collaborator, so I got in touch with Gary Martin, the inker for Nexus, and we just kind of talked about stuff. And I would come up with all these ideas, and he would contribute a few things here and there. Because again, I had this rush of feelings that would just come out. It's like when you ask writers, where did these ideas come from? Well, anywhere. They come from inside of you. And the writers will always say the same thing. I don't know where they come from. When they talk to me, I know I'm on the right track. They always mention that they talk to me. And that's a very bizarre human phenomenon, isn't it? Fictional characters talking to you.
But that's also probably why you enjoyed the pantheon of characters you created at Nexus.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fandom, there's this whole Stan Lee versus Jack Kirby. They did work together. Jack did stuff on his own and whatnot. Do you feel that there should be a debate? Do you have a position on that debate? Should there be a position on that debate?
Positions on debates, I think, are kind of a waste of time. Everyone accounts for their decisions in life. There was a lot of mistakes made at Marvel. I would put that almost entirely on the Marvel side. But Jack's mind was he was very eccentric, and After a while, he began to, I think, kind of inflate the conditions that he worked under. But that's what happens in life. The only bad thing about it is that it became so public. It got blown up into a balloon so big that people talk about it to this day.
You felt they co-created that stuff.
Jack was responsible for, I think, 75% of the stories. And the rest was this marvelous guy named Stanley who would take scripts and work this magic with them, which made up the Marvel Age. And the funny thing about the whole Marvel Age in the 60s was everything they ever did was based on what came from that time period. And people are still screwing around those characters. They've done 100 versions of those characters. But the only thing that ever mattered to me was the ones I grew up with. And all these other offshoots are just, they're just playthings for Marvel to exploit the characters that they weren't part of when they came in later on in the business. Now, Marvel was based on this, and this, and mostly they were all created by this incredible mind of this genius, literal genius named Jack Kirby.
Final question for me is about the documentary. I watched it. I love your stuff, and I've read all, every single Nexus and everything you've done outside of Nexus. I love your stuff, and I watched it, and I saw that there was two things that they were discussing in there. One was entering the world of fine art, as well as struggling with the bipolar disorder, and those were kind of highlighted in the documentary. How did that documentary come about? Do you feel like it succeeded in what you wanted out of it? And what was your impression of the final outcome of it?
The final outcome was a real disappointment. And this was on purpose from the very beginning. You don't want to put out a documentary where everything is easygoing. That doesn't incite controversy. I told them to deliberately make it as controversial as possible. Focus on the things that are especially different about me. And one of them was the sadness that would come over me because I realized at some point certain chemicals were missing from my mind, and it caused me to react with much more feelings than a normal person might have. And I think that's what really comes down to when you talk about brain chemicals being not balanced right. One thing will override the other one, and one of them was extreme sensitivity to things. When I would see bad things happen to good people, I would get really worked up about it. So I needed help. I finally found it, but after going through, the usual requisite 10, 12 doctors that didn't know what the hell they were even doing, I finally found somebody that found a way to balance me. And I've been like that ever since. It's just, if somebody's reacting too strongly in a way that's ill affecting your life, you need to find a way to balance the ill part of it. And that's all it came down to for me or anyone else that has those kind of situations. All we want is somebody to help us out. And the fact that there's so few people that know what they're doing with this stuff is a real detriment. It causes a lot of pain.
Do you feel the documentary represented you accurately, or do you feel like they edited in a way where you weren't represented accurately?
It was very deliberately edited in a way that pushed the controversial things like depression and things like that. What I remember about the documentary was the guy that did it was a really nice guy. But by the time the actual editing came around, I saw a complete personality flip-flop. It went from a very, very nice, concerned, sensitive guy to a vulgar human being. I thought he had kind of lost his mind. That's my take on things. He's got a different one, obviously, but that's mine. So when it came to the editing process, the filmmaker ended up calling everybody that was part of that documentary except for me to get my take on things. He didn't want to hear what I had to say about it. So it came out the way it did. I thought he did a really good job. I actually give it an 80% of how good it was, but the 20% that was missing, everyone said the same thing. You missed his sense of humor. There's no humor in this documentary. It's all down, down, down. And of all the things he filmed that could have been in there, that's what I would have put in to balance it. And there was no balance. It was very one-sided.
I've suffered with some mental illness issues myself, basically around attention deficit. And until I got the right help, it was like, I think I felt like you did. and it took me a while to find somebody who could really help me. So I applaud you for being vocal about that and saying things like this in public, because I think it could help someone else.
You don't want to keep those things buried inside. They don't do anyone in the world any good, especially yourself. Why not bring up concerns that really, when you find out and you start talking about them, the people that come out of the woodwork that start talking about the same problem. I mean, look at the people in Hollywood, the actors. My God, I don't think there's a functional one among them. And I applaud them for coming out and just saying, I have a problem with alcohol. I can't keep marriages working. I'm depressed. I mean, this is just rampant. And it's a good thing they're coming out like that, because back in the 50s and the Frank Sinatra days, they didn't talk about this stuff.
Agreed. So I'm curious, and I'm sure Alex is too, since we're both such Nexus fans. What is the new stuff coming out? Can you explain a little bit and give us some details on the new Nexus that you're producing?
When Bear and I started to have disagreements about story, I decided that because I had a different take on things, one of the things I wanted to bring back was the idiosyncratic humor that was in the book, and the more basic sense of storytelling there was. So what I wanted to do really was take the first 10 years of Nexus and return it to that. That constitutes a couple things. One, you never knew what was going to happen. Two, you were always entertained, and three, you always wanted to come back for more. So if you read my version of Nexus, if that feeling imparts to you, then I've done my job.
And you also told me the other day when we were talking on the phone, you told me that you're revisiting those first few Capital books and you're redoing them. What's that all about? Let us know about that a little bit.
Oh, that was just an aside. I was talking about some of the things that we did in the very first black and white issue when I was still finding my way. Well, actually, I can show you right here. That was from the very first Nexus book. I thought, what if I redid that as a painting?
Holy moly.
Space Ghost. And it's Jack Kirby, just to keep fresh in what I call fighting trim with the medium of oil paint. Because every serious artist wants to learn how to work with oils. And due to my training and the workshops I've been to and the teachers I've had over the years, it's really the ultimate. Besides, all my illustrators worked in that too.
Folds in those pants reminded me of like Gene Colan folds that I've seen in Daredevil.
I thought the same thing. That's so funny, Alex. I thought the same thing.
This is a guy named Andrew Zorn, and he was one of the big three, along with Sargent and Soroya, that influenced my generation of people to the watercolor, and I'm obsessed with watercolors. So I practice it, and this is what I do in my spare time here.
Now, you said you had some Jack Kirby pages you wanted to show us. I just want to make sure that we give you that. So, because I'm curious too, like what catches your eye about the King of Comics? I'm sure Bill's curious too.
Oh, I'm very curious.
These happen to be Coletta. I like the scratchiness and texture that Coletta brought, even though he was, condemned for a lot of things he should have been condemned for. But I like his work. And the way he did clouds like this over here, I just love that. A lot of expressive things that aren't traditional in comic book work. Here's some great Royer stuff right here from the Demon.
I love the Demon. I love the what Mike Royer did on Kirby in the Demon. There's a haggard nature to it that's unstoppable. I love that stuff. Wow, Miss Miracle. Mm-hmm.
Another thing to keep in mind is whenever I work with an inker, it all comes back to me to touch up. There's another great Royer Kirby page right here from Mr. Miracle.
That's an iconic page.
Gorgeous.
That's the Wolverine claw snick going on.
Invented by Kirby. No one's surprised. This is something I picked up, and I just love this thing. It's rough pencils from Jack Kirby. You might recall that when DC put out the Jimmy Olsen reprints, they heard about this piece that I had, and they said, "Would you ink it for the cover of this book?" So I got my light table out and my vellum, and I just I would never touch the original. That's sacrilegious. This page right here has the marking in the back of $75. Someday it'll be worth $100,000. Oh, and that's, you can see the signature down there to the dude. And that's some of the very few pages that I had him signing for me. This is a page I got later on as I traded some Space Ghost animation art for it. I would call these things like personal talismans that never let me forget where I came from.
Wow, the jumping in the buildings. That's a wild picture. I feel like I'm falling into it.
Look at that. That is amazing.
Yeah, it's just part of Kirby's effects and the way he draws things. When he draws explosions, there's kind of a whiteout effect. That's what I like about Coletta, is his texturizing he does here.
Oh, look at that.
I get lost in all the wonderful textures. Look at the branches and the hair and that werewolf guy.
One thing Coletta is always consistent in is eyelashes. So with like a werewolf, it sounds like he was good with his hair follicles. That's great.
That's the wonderful thing about comics is you take all these different personalities, which is really what it comes down to, and like the signatures and the Disney artists I was mentioning earlier. Everyone is reflective of them, and no two are the same for good reason. This is one of the pages I got that I'll just show it to you here.
Captain America.
It's not. It looks like a sleeper, but it's actually not. It's the Tales of
Suspense.
and this is absolutely primo primetime Jack Kirby from 1966. Just one of his million attributes that made him so great. Never mind the fact that he could put out 3 books a month. You know, I couldn't care less if Thor wasn't in there. I just like it for the art. I mean, I look at the ink on his face right here, and I just get really, you know.
Yeah, he has that Ming the Merciless look. That's like an Alex Raymond kind of thing.
From these, Kirby should have kept working out by 18, but the business forced him into doing things that he never should have been forced to do, to reduce from 12 by 18 to 10 by 15.
So now, first I want to say, Steve, thank you for being on the Comic Historians podcast. I know you and Bill have been talking a lot these past a few weeks, building up to the Rude weekend next week. So I hope you guys take some footage and pictures. Bill, you got to share this stuff on your Facebook page. My takeaway from this, just talking to you for the first time, learning about you, is you really live by your own personal integrity, professional honesty, and then that shines in your work. And I can think of no better way to live, by a set of principles that have gone unchanged and formed, and you stay true to yourself. And I really thank you so much for being here with us. It's meant the world to both of us.
Can you tell us just a little bit before we go? Can you tell us what people should expect from next weekend, Steve?
Yeah, that's a good way to wrap this up. You can expect me to be very cordial. You'll see me taking a great interest in individuals. I like to get to know people for the individuals that they are. It's not just a mass of people, they're all individuals, and every one of them has an interesting story that I like to probe into. So that's another thing that I think is something that most people don't tend to do. But for me, that's my lifeblood. And you want to, when you're involved in a group of people, you want to be one of them. You either come and see me do my demos and get to know the person behind the comic book that they happen to like a lot. But the character part of it is a big thing to me. So what I like to do, what I've learned to do over the years, is to treat people as individually, from the models that agreed to come aboard for the 2 demos on Saturday and Sunday, to all the people that go there wanting to know more about this artist that they've never met before. So you really have to come across like someone that measures up, let's just call it. And for me, that's no problem, because I've been cultivating that my whole life.
Alex really puts all this together and makes this podcast wonderful. And we don't do it enough these days because we've both got a lot going on in our own lives. But this is one of my favorite podcasts we've ever done over the last 6 years. And I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing it.
Well, it's a very difficult thing what Alex is doing here. There's hundreds of people that do this kind of interview stuff, and obviously, it varies as much as the artists that we like drawing comics or the writers that we like doing books. And you can tell that Alex is very prepared for this.
Yes, very. I'm the one who flies by the seat of his pants, but Alex is the one who is really the orchestrator, and I'm very grateful for him.